Today's podcast is brought to you by Progresso Talent Partners, who for more than 25 years have successfully delivered interim and permanent leadership talent to transform businesses. To hire the talent you need to enable your business to thrive, visit www.progressotalent.com today. Mark Cribb is the founder and managing director of Urban Guild, an especially wonderful mix of independent food and drink venues in the beautiful county of Dorset, created for humans by humans. A true champion of the hospitality industry, he is the host of Humans of Hospitality podcast, through which he showcases stories and insight from the people behind our food and drink. 20 years ago, armed with a degree in leisure management, he set off for a couple of years around the world, where he developed his incredible passion for life. On his return, he honed his craft for great customer service in the leisure industry, before buying an old B&B, and his entrepreneurial journey was born. So what's his story? Without further ado, let's get into it. Good morning, Mark Cribb. Great to have you on as my guest on the Extrology podcast. I know that in what undeniably through our conversation today, we'll explore our very interesting times, to say the least, from a hospitality industry perspective. But before we get into more recent debates and more recent issues, I'm really keen to find out kind of the story behind the brand, if you like, but particularly behind you and the early years in particular. So tell me, where did you grow up? Am I right in thinking you're a Dorset boy?
Yeah, morning, Lee. Thank you so much for the invite. Lovely to be here. And local boy, basically. So yeah, very much, born in Bournemouth, well, Poole Hospital, actually, so not too far away. And spent, all of my education up until I went off to university, which was in Southampton, but all of my time in Bournemouth, really. So Porchester School, then Bournemouth College, lived life by the beach. And it's nice, actually, because, there's not that many people in Bournemouth, really, who are actually born in the town. It's such an amazing place to live. And I think we're so close to London, we attract a lot of people down. But yeah, I've been here all my life and super grateful, to be honest, because no offence to, places like Swindon or Slough, but I'm not sure I would have loved my hospitality adventure quite so much if I didn't have a beautiful view over the ocean every day. So yeah, very lucky.
So growing up with a big family, I guess where did that first sense that hospitality as an industry might have been something you would pursue? When did that first started? Sort of that seed first plant?
Yeah, down to my parents, really. So not a big family, just, my brother and I, and then my mum and dad. And my mum, first thing they did in hospitality, I think she was a secretary at the town hall, and my dad was working on the railways, so he worked for British Rail. Funny enough, actually, on the sort of catering, what are they called, coaches. So he was a chief steward, I think, on the train. So he was cooking and making food and making drinks for people. But my mum bought a little B&B in Boscombe, actually, still where I live. So in Hamilton Road, it was called the Lynmouth Hotel, only a little 7-bedroom place. I can't remember how old I was then, but probably 8 years old, something like that. So for about 5 or 6 years, I lived in a B&B, and in the winter it was all sort of foreign students coming to stay, and then in the summer it was general tourists, and just got used to chatting to people and it being interesting, particularly the students. I like the students because they were always there for a period of time, and they had really interesting kind of backgrounds and cultures, which probably subconsciously inspired my sort of later travels, I suppose. But I also always remember my dad absolutely hated it. He hated living in a hotel. He used to climb over the back wall when he was coming in and out of the building, because if he walked out the front door, then the guests, would spot him. And he's actually a very sort of sociable character. But I suppose, he had his normal job and was going off to work, and the thought of getting stuck in reception and, chatting to a couple of people who might be down having ice creams and walking along the beach for their sort of, annual holiday. So very different times, sort of, 30 odd years ago, I suppose, different type of tourist that was coming, people often staying for a week at a time. But yeah, that would have been the start of hospitality. And I can't remember how many years they ran that. And there may have been a gap in between, but they ultimately ended up running a catering wagon, so like a burger kind of hot dog wagon on the high street on the markets. So Christchurch Market, Boscombe Market, and half of my family live in Australia. So I remember one summer they went off to Oz for 6 weeks. And by this time I must have been about 18. And they left me with their business for a couple of months and said, look, you can run it, pay the rent, pay the cost, but basically any cash you earn, they just wanted somebody to run the business for them whilst they were away. And so that was my first kind of proper go, I suppose, at being an entrepreneur and sticking the catering wagon on the back of the car and driving it down to Boscombe Market, sticking it in place for the day. And we'd be there at sort of 5:30, 6 in the morning, serving the traders, setting up, and then into the customers for the rest of the day. So very different end of the market, I suppose, from a burger wagon on Boscombe Market. And now, all the actual proper business for me was a hotel that was only probably 250 metres away from that, but albeit with a fairly big sort of chunk of time in between. But yeah, that's where it started.
And do you remember that first day? Had you worked with your parents on that van beforehand? I guess you would have had some experiences of helping out, whatever it may have been. So you weren't completely raw going into it on that first day?
No, I definitely helped them out. It's a pretty it's a challenging business, hard work, because you've literally you got to tow your kitchen into a position. You sort of start from scratch. It's really cold. My brother and I both sort of laugh now because we both worked on the markets when we were kids, but just how different it is once you've actually got a building and you can kind of rock up and open the doors and actually the heating's on and everything's already in its place. Because with something mobile that you drag around, you've got to pack everything away properly. It's obviously freezing cold. There's no heating. It's just got a big hole on the front of it. So it's a tough job, particularly in the proper winter months. I sympathise with market traders. They've really got to pack everything down, start from scratch each day. So it's hard graft, but it's good fun. The culture of the market traders, there's a lot of good banter. It tends to be the same people each week. They did it for a number of years, so you really get to know these people. And you speak to market traders and they're never having a good day. It's always tough. It's always tough, but there's probably fairly big sort of chunky amounts of cash floating around between all these traders. They all seem to be, doing all right and living quite interesting lives. You get real characters, I think, at that end of humanity, sort of, grafters out on the street, almost, under the radar a little bit. So yeah, in the main, I really enjoyed it. But yeah, I'd had enough experience that I could just sort of pick it up and run with it. And in the main enjoyed it. It's a tough. It can be tough to do customer service in those environments. It's not always the kind of clientele that you probably get in your restaurants. But again, in the main, I just love, I love humanity and the quirks of humanity. And actually, as I've got older, I probably got more and more respect for the sort of the non-conformist, I suppose, and the quirkier ends of humanity.
What do you think you gained from that experience on the markets? What do you think it equipped you with?
I think definitely, sort of cash flow and profitability. I remember it was a long time, even into buying, the hotel, which I'm sure we'll come to. But, I remember when it became odd that at the end of the day, you didn't have more money than at the start of the day. The thing is with my businesses now is they're very seasonal. I can lose an awful amount of money, huge amounts of money for long periods of time, for months on end going through the winter. But you have to look at it sort of this annual cycle of make your money in the summer, lose it in the winter. The good thing with market trading is the simplicity of the business. You've got everything on the day, basically. You've got the stock that you start the day with, and that's stock management and making sure that there's no wastage. The staffing, you're not going to have people sort of sitting around for a month in the winter when you don't really need them. The staff are there when you need them on the day. Cash has got to be balanced at the end of the day. Invoices are generally paid on the day. There's no kind of monthly accounts. So you get this sort of micro business, even marketing and writing the menus and price points and everything really in a big business is kind of focused into this maybe 6 or 7 hour kind of period of trading on 3 days a week. And although you're only trading 3 days a week, the other days you're down at Booker's and buying the stock and doing all the prep, all the prep's done the day before. All the sort of, chopping the onions and filling the sauces and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, real kind of focus, I suppose, of all elements of a business in a real concentrate. And then only later in life do you realize that actually, things can be quite complicated and you've got, accruals and prepayments and insurance and downtime and all sorts of random stuff, but that comes later.
Let's talk about the journey to Urban Beach, which is perhaps where certainly Urban Guild as a brand as we sit here today, that, as I understand it, is where the journey began. But what was the journey from you from a market stall at 18 and your parents in Australia to, I think you were, am I right in thinking mid-20s, something like that, when you first opened Urban Beach? So what was the story in between and how did you arrive to a hotel in Boscombe?
Yeah, 30 actually. So there was a fair old gap. So one of the key things is, I knew I wanted to work with people and not behind a desk. Clearly I liked human beings. I liked a bit of chat and a bit of banter. And there was never a point, I don't think, where I thought I want to sit behind a desk for my career. Actually, academia-wise, I was pretty good. I didn't go to a particularly, good school, but I got good grades and I did well. I did a business studies course. Funny enough, I remember, going to see my careers advisor when I was leaving secondary school, not really having any idea what I wanted to do. I was, sort of pretty decently clever. I'd got good results, but didn't really see the point of going off and doing A-levels and studying, geography and history. I just didn't really understand why I'd want to spend 2 years learning a subject, which now I probably find fascinating. But at the time I was just like, what is the point of studying geography for 2 years? And I was sat with my careers advisor, and he said, have you ever heard of business studies? You can do a course in business studies. And I had no idea that such a thing, existed. I was aware of traditional education. And I suppose the natural route then was to do A-levels, but actually to do business studies, it was a BTEC diploma, national diploma. And I love that because it was finance and it was marketing, and it was real life stuff that I could use. But always, on this journey, I always knew ultimately I wanted to go traveling. So I went to university, studied a degree in leisure management. So again, keeping stuff interesting. I was into my water sports. I'd always lived by the beach. I was pretty good at sailing. So really that was business studies, but focused in on the leisure industry. But I saved all my student loans, all the way through. I was very driven through university that I didn't go and spank all my loans in the bar. I always knew I wanted to go and see the world. And I don't know where that obsession came from really, but it was never in doubt. I was like, when I finish, I'm going to go, I'm going to travel. And even, girlfriends at the time, I would always be like, yeah, this is great, serious, committed, but I am going to go traveling as soon as I can. And so 21 years of age, hit the road, went over to Australia, and I feel for my parents now, but I just bought a one-way ticket. I just said, I don't know how long I'm going to be. I might be 3-4 weeks, not really sure. Might be a year, might be a bit longer, don't really know. And I bought a one-way ticket to Bangkok and then a one-way ticket out of Bali into Sydney. And that was the only two things that I planned. The rest of it was just to work out as I go. And I had this incredible adventure, sort of traveling the world. I ended up being gone for nearly 2 years. Came back through Asia. But eventually, I think once I was sat on the buses, on the coaches, sort of, traveling around in Asia, and I was more interested in reading the book than looking out the window, that was a bit of a trigger for me. And I thought, if you're taking it for granted that much, that you can be sit here going past all these amazing temples and through this beautiful scenery, and you're actually sat here engrossed in a book. And I remember sort of thinking, right, it's time to go home. You need to go back and become a grown-up. So came back to the UK, and my now wife, then not even girlfriend, I suppose, but Fiona, she was working up in London. She was a primary school teacher. Came back to Bournemouth, and having travelled for 2 years, I can't remember what I was doing for a job. I think I got a job at Pool Tourism. I was just sort of kicking about, but I was bored. I found that the thing with traveling, I was permanently lost. It was permanently an adventure. I was permanently meeting new people. I was permanently out of my comfort zone, and I wasn't in Bournemouth. It felt like that I knew every kind of street, every road, every corner I turned around was familiar to me, and I missed that buzz and that adventure of travel. So I went up to see Fee up in London, and she was living in Tooting Broadway at the time. And Tooting Broadway was so diverse, and I remember walking through the market and walking down the high street, and every possible kind of ethnicity and different kinds of people, and the noise and the kind of the food that was available on the markets, and it just for me felt like traveling again. And I'd never liked London. I was a sea boy, like brought up by the beach, and I just thought, actually, that's like travel. I can't go away again. I need to sort of sort my life out a little bit. But if I do it in London, maybe that's where I'll get this sort of this compromise and this buzz and adventure. So I went up to London and got a job running health clubs and leisure centres, so working around hospitality. And that's the sort of key bit of advice, I suppose, that I always give people now as well is, if you want to be self-employed, if you're entrepreneurial, probably at some point practice with somebody else's money. So all the time that I was up there, I was still driven. I still ultimately thought I would be self-employed. I still thought I'd come back to Bournemouth, but I got jobs running health clubs, leisure centres, even ran a golf course for a while. So always around hospitality, but I was just constantly learning. The first team of people that I managed was a Ghanaian team of attendants in the changing rooms in a Homes Place, sort of posh health club right in the centre of London in the Barbican. And I always loved the contradiction that we'd open at 5:30 in the morning, and all the city slickers in their suits would kind of come in, and I was like, yeah, I might be working in central London, but fundamentally, I'm in a health club and I'm in a gym, and it's very different to all the kind of city boys that are coming in as customers. But these Ghanaian attendants were a challenging bunch of people, they're not particularly well paid, not particularly well motivated, but I absolutely loved them because they were from Ghana, and that sounded like a cool place, and they had these amazing names. They were all named after sort of days of the week, basically. And Ashok was the head honcho, and he was just he was like running his little Ghanaian kind of mafia crew, basically. But I earned their respect by getting in there. We had all these big sort of washing machines and tumble dryers and buried in the basement of this health club. And I was never afraid to get in there and to work with them. And it was, frantic trying to provide all this sort of cleanliness and clean showers and changing rooms and facilities for, I think it was a 13,000 kind of membership club. But that's where I cut my teeth into how to manage people. This is a very long answer, isn't it, Lee? But eventually, having kind of learnt with other people's cash, I think Fee and I got engaged, and I was like, right, if we're going to have kids, start a family, have a proper life, I don't really want to be self-employed in London. I don't see this as our long-term home. And I was like, let's get back to Bournemouth and just look for something. And I was looking at coffee shops over in Wimborne.
Did you have a sense at that point of what it was that you might be looking for, or were you looking for the kind of eureka moment, the light bulb to come on?
Yeah, when I got back from travelling in, I think it was 99, I'd almost set up a backpackers hostel before I went to London. And I'd looked at somewhere near the railway station. So I guess I'd seen hospitality done well in Australia and in New Zealand and places I'd travelled. And I couldn't really understand how Bournemouth was a tourism town. That's its history, built off the back of a spa kind of town. But we seemed pretty bad. It was all very chintzy, very floral bed and breakfasts. The bed and breakfast at those times was, breakfast is served between 7 in the morning and 7:30. You have to be back in your room by 10 o'clock that night, because that's when we lock the front doors. And these just weren't run as customer service at their heart. So I tried to set up a backpacker hostel, but whatever I was then, 23 years old, no money, no business experience, it was really difficult. So I guess I'd had this sort of leaning towards getting back into hospitality. So when I came back to Bournemouth, I was looking in that sector. And by that point, I think I thought, whatever building I can get my hands on, I will sweat that asset. Somehow I'll find a way of making it work. And came across what became the Urban Beach, but just a very rundown old chintzy bed and breakfast in Boscombe. It was just over £500,000 to buy. It was turning over sort of 68 grand a year, or whatever, was just under the VAT limit at that time. And out of my price bracket, but I still had this yearning to be self-employed. And in the end, I think I'd been looking for a business probably then for a couple of years and couldn't work out how just to get my foot on the ladder. And in the end, I went to my parents and I said, look, I don't want you to give me any money because I'm not comfortable with that. We don't come from a wealthy background, but they had paid off their house. I said, look, I don't want to borrow any money from you. I don't want you to give me any money, but can I use your house as an asset to raise a deposit, basically? Can I refinance it? And that deposit I raised was 150 grand that I wanted to raise on their house. I put a proper business proposal to them. I said, look, if I go back into my career, I can pay that back. It was like, I don't know, £500 a month or something like that. So I said, I can find a way of paying you. I said, even if I buy this building and it doesn't work out, I can do an HMO on it. I can let it to students. It will still cover the cost of the mortgage and your money. But I can't see any other way of me getting my foot on the ladder of a business without some sort of injection of finance. And luckily they said yes. And we had a little legal document drawn up. So, it was done officially. And I think I caused them a few sleepless nights, but it was, what a great motivator. Fundamentally, if I failed, then my parents could lose their house. And that was a real motivator. So that's how we ended up with this very rundown, old, chintzy bed and breakfast in the back end of Boscombe, which, you're local, but most people who know it will consider to be a sort of pretty crappy part of town. And that's where the adventure started. And I was right. If I could get hold of an asset, then I could transform it.
And could you see that transformation? Had you seen the building, thought, I know what this could become? Because the transition that you took that building on, if I look at what it looks like today versus perhaps how I imagine it might have looked when you first set eyes upon it, I would imagine, they're poles apart, absolutely poles apart.
Yeah, I remember showing around my Uncle Kevin and Auntie Sue, and anyone, to be fair, that came and looked around it, and everybody just thought I was absolutely insane. Nobody else could see what I could see, because it was just a really, floral pink wallpaper, just proper chintzy, wooden clogs above the fireplace, rundown bedrooms. I couldn't really work out why anybody would stay there. And I always feel bad if the people I bought it from are listening, because to them, they were probably very proud of their little business. I don't think I could visualize how far we took it, but I could visualize it being, so much better than it was. I could visualize it as this term boutique hotel, which wasn't a term that I was familiar with when I was traveling. I tried to set up a hostel previously, but this boutique hotel concept, which was really, small hotel, but 5-star standards, good showers, good linen, good fixtures, good attention to detail. For me, that was all relatively easy to achieve. Where I really wanted to excel was amazing customer service. I wanted to offer the kind of service that you got when you walked into a backpackers hostel in New Zealand, where you were met with really friendly people. They really knew the local area. They knew the best places to travel, the trips to go on, the excursions. Super informal, but genuine hospitality. It's kind of like, welcome into my space. Can I get you a drink? Have a seat. It's not customer service. It's hospitality. And for me, there's a big difference. And yeah, I just remember walking into those spaces when I was traveling and think, God, I've never had customer service or hospitality like this in my life. And that's the bit that I really wanted to focus on. But we took that business from turning over, like I say, 68,000 to 1.1 million in 36 months. And the bank would have laughed at me if I'd gone to them and told them this is the journey we're going to go on. I don't think I would have believed it, but I think we hit our, the 5-year business plan that we put towards the bank to convince them to lend us the cash, which wasn't easy. I think we hit that in the first 12 months of trade.
Goodness, and how? What is it that you did that enabled you to enjoy that level of success? Apart from the obvious blood, sweat and tears, but nonetheless, it's no mean feat. And there aren't many businesses who would claim that kind of accolade. How did you affect that kind of success in such a short period of time?
Yeah, I think, I now know, but I don't suppose I did then, that hospitality is the sort of, the perfection of 1,000 moving parts. And it's really hard. I think I always knew, and I'd say to the team, well, there was no team then, so it was me in the early days, but once we did get people, is that, I've got no idea of which one of these details that I obsess about actually makes a difference. But, I was very early on, and I don't know where this came from, but, I loved brand, I loved marketing, I loved detail. But I was very conscious on the customer journey from the point of hitting the website. And even websites then, sort of 16 years ago, were fairly new. A lot of hotels were advertising still in brochures. We wouldn't have been able to build that venue's reputation without the internet, but I suppose I was fairly young, so getting a website, and a website where you could view your individual rooms. But I remember looking at having the logo designed, and then straight away making sure that we had that logo on the coffee cups, which now is obvious, but back then there wasn't really a coffee culture. There wasn't really coffee shops, and certainly if you did go to them, you didn't get branded kind of crockery and stuff like that. So we'd start to focus on these little details. I had the logo kind of printed on the door numbers so that when you went up to the doors. And for me, it was that journey. It was kind of like, right, customer hits the website. What do they see? What do they feel? What's the brand? How is that reflected when they pull up in the car park? What do they see when they pull up in the car park? What do they see when they come into reception, when they go to their room? Sort of how many touch points are there where we can reinforce that quality? That was all well and good, but fundamentally the place was still a bit of a shithole. And the biggest thing I had to do was apologize to people and just go sort of like, this is what I'm going to create. This is the vision that's in my head. We're not there yet, but you can tell from all the little details that I did get right, and because of the genuine hospitality, they would forgive. Most of them would forgive the rubbish kind of showers and the very dated kind of decor. And I'd painted over bits and tried to make the best of it. But I think British people always support the underdog, and most of the customers coming in could just see this fairly young chap who was very honest. The information in the hotel said, look, I've borrowed £500,000. If this goes wrong, my parents lose their house, and I'm very committed. It's going to take us a few years to build it, but very transparent. This is what we're going to do. And then I offered him a good breakfast, good bit of banter, some good customer service, and the vast majority of people just loved the journey and the story, and they came back each year because they wanted to see it grow. And I had some that hated it, who was sort of really rude. But they were right. It was a pretty shit rundown B&B fundamentally, and people would give you feedback because they felt they'd been sort of I suppose misled by the website and the brand, and would turn up. But the vast majority of people loved it, and where we were located in Boscombe, had a pretty iffy reputation for anywhere to go and eat and drink. Sort of reputation for selling drugs and just disruptive behaviour, I suppose, in any local bars. But actually, because accommodation was cheap in that area, there were lots of nurses and teachers and proper, good humans basically, that were just there because it was cheap accommodation. And they were so grateful that somewhere had opened that was their target market. Policemen and when all these people started queuing up, and we had the politest queue in town, I think, of people queuing sort of single file to get to the bar, and we had a little bit of outside space where you could sit in the sun, and people just loved the fact that who was this mental guy who decided to come up along and set up this really kind of cool, nice bar. And I was just aiming at people like me, probably pre-kids or just had kids, living locally, didn't have loads of cash, but wanted a bit of quality, and it grew from there.
How much do you think you look at your early experience to which you referred living in a B&B with your mum? You would have seen the way your mum would have treated her guests, her people. How much of that was an influence, do you think, on the way you were? What strikes me is that I've always felt people will always remember how you made them feel. And what you're talking about is, in my view, is how these people felt when they stayed in your hotel and how they felt as they left. And you obviously made a real impression. How much of an influence do you think was your mum and those early years in that B&B on that kind of outlook from your perspective?
Yeah, it's really difficult. I have to presume that it was key, and I certainly, like I said, I've got good memories of living in the hotel. I've got good memories of the foreign students, and some of the relationships that were built with them. I think I was a bit young. I can't remember what age I left. I'd say maybe 11 or 12. When we left the hotel, so I don't think I was consciously sort of absorbing it, but subconsciously I was. And what I would say for my parents and what they definitely taught me is, they treated everybody the same. They didn't have particularly high profile jobs. Like you say, mum works for the council, dad works on the railways, but they were just decent. They didn't put a lot of pressure on me. They were always, encouraging, of what I was doing and my education. I think it's a bit like, the bit I say to my team a lot is that, I expect a lot, but I don't demand a lot. And they were the same. They never demanded anything from me, but they just had high expectations. And that expectation was fundamentally, be a decent human being. And I do think that, if you're brought up in a hotel, meeting lots of different people, you become a chameleon. You're really good at changing your personality, and probably even more so on the markets. You've got some market traders who are, are quite posh, or at least think they're quite posh and quite well spoken, and, have got plenty of money. And then you've got some real kind of, dodgy geezers who are doing it. And as the sort of, the tea and coffee maker and the lunch maker, everybody uses you. Doesn't matter which one of those. Normally on the markets, you only allow one, maybe two catering providers. We were the only one. And you're sort of protected that way. So everybody has to use you. So again, that ability to be a chameleon, basically, and just be able to have the different levels of banter with the different ages, the young geezers and the older guys who've been doing it all of their life. So that was probably a skill that I had was and same being up in London and managing a team of Ghanaians to then going out the front and dealing with the city slickers on reception, was just this ability to be able to flip personalities. I remember doing some disc profiling, sales profiling, dominant, influential, steady and cautious. And I love that. I just love the fact that within the first sort of 3 or 4 seconds of meeting somebody, you can assess their personality profile. You can actually assess it without even speaking to them when I was in sales, just by how they'd answered the questions that we would give them and they'd have written on the bit of paper to come into a sales club. And anybody who just, answered, very few questions, absolute minimum, was probably quite a dominant, needed to be spoken with quite fast, needed to be challenged. And other people, often with smaller, neater handwriting that had filled in, pages of answers, they were much more steady or cautious, and you'd spend more time with them and you'd give examples of, this is what other people think and what other people do. And I just found it fascinating. And that's not in a manipulative way, but just to get the best out of other human beings. You don't change the other human being, you change yourself, and you don't change your beliefs or your sort of, your core values you live by, but it's very easy to just the sort of language, the swearing, the eye contact, the banter, is it soft, is that, I love all of that. And as I've said, I've more and more over the years, I just love the quirks of humanity. I just find it fascinating.
So was there a point at which you thought with Urban Beach, first of all, was there a point at which you thought, have I bitten off more than I can chew? What have I done here? Was there that kind of moment? And do you remember how that felt?
Yeah, I always look back and I think there were no bits I regret. I would say the bitten off more than I can chew bit really came when we added reef, properly. In the beach days, the biggest things were, the question I suppose was around the refurbishment. So I remember we completely replumbed the building. After the first year, when we'd taken the business, I think from sort of 60k up to about 180k revenue. That gave us the confidence to renovate the rooms and to go to the next level. So we actually, year 2, we took it from 180 to £500,000, and we did that by renovating the bedrooms and making them, way more swanky than I'd ever probably imagined we would be able to do. But in the process of doing that, we completely replumbed the building, and I think it was called HEP 2.0. Don't sue me, but these were these plastic connectors. I think it was operator error that they'd not been put together correctly, basically. And with about 350 of these connections, so every pipe in the building was connected with a little bit of HEP 2.0, and just after we'd finished refurbing, or towards the end, these little connectors started to pop, and all of a sudden water would cascade down through the building. So I remember one of the sort of most memorable was Father's Day, so it would have been April, I guess, and I was cooking in the kitchen, and it was a pretty shoddy kitchen. We hadn't done the ground floor, but we'd done the top floors, and within about 60 seconds, the bistro was full of people. I was flipping some burgers and cooking some food for people because I was the chef at the time, and then literally water started to fill the cupboards, pour through the ceilings, burgers were floating on the griddle. I mean, just litres and litres and litres, gallons of water cascading through the building. And I had to go out to the bistro and sort of, apologise and send everybody home because there was no way that we could reopen. And that just continued to happen. We must have had maybe 30 or 40 of these leaks kind of crop up. One room, I remember, we'd hung the plasma telly on the wall and brand new mattress, and we were literally just about to open the doors. And again, water poured through the building twice. So we had to, this beautiful building that we'd done up, we had to cut all holes in the ceiling, holes in the floorboards. We had to replace all of these products we could find, but some of them were so well hidden, we just couldn't find them. And then there was the legal challenge from the plumber who I was refusing to pay, who needed to resolve it. So there were definitely stressful times. And I remember thinking, what happens if a guest is laying in bed at 2 a.m. and all of a sudden one of these pops and water pours over them, and especially if it's the hot water. So it wasn't so much questioning what I was doing, but you just kind of realize, it's not easy. But the sort of financial panic really came when we opened Urban Reef.
So at what point did you think, okay, so you've enjoyed, again, blood, sweat and tears, but nonetheless, you've started to enjoy some success and see the fruits of your labour with Urban Beach. At what point did you think there's more? There's, this could be it's a brand. At what point did that evolution start to form in your own mind?
I think the do more just came, and again, it's really hard to sort of remember the specifics, but fundamentally, we were busy. So by year 3, we were turning over £1 million, and I sort of gone, you know what? Yeah, I thought if I got hold of an asset, I could use it, and the brand and the website and the people, and it was good. We were getting some good feedback, and the product was nice by this point. I didn't need to be embarrassed and apologise to people by this point. But I just think down on the beachfront, there was it was just a unique opportunity in the fact that it was the old toilet and sort of storage rooms, and it was right overlooking the beach. And I'd always, the hotel was called Urban Beach, and I love the beach. I'd travelled. I was lived in flip-flops and shorts. I'd always loved living by the ocean. And as a kid, I do remember my parents taking me off to sort of, Torremolinos and places like that. And there'd be all these amazing cafes and bars on the beach. And I'd think in Bournemouth, we're supposed to be a national, but probably an international tourism town. Why have we only got council-run buildings pretty much selling sort of soggy polystyrene boxes of soggy chips? And I think at that point, Bistro on the Beach was the only restaurant that sort of had even the slight sort of hint of quality. And I think maybe there was I don't think it was a Harvester at the time, but one of the big brands had a pub, so at least you could go to the beach and get a pint of beer. But everything else was run by the local authority, and it was terrible. And this opportunity came up with this beautiful spot right on the beachfront. And I thought, from being a kid, when I'd been in Torremolinos, I'd always thought, how cool, how amazing would it be to have a bar or some sort of restaurant on the beach? We had more demand by this point than, we could sort of cope with. I was fairly confident that a lot of people coming to stay in the hotel would love to go down to the seafront. A lot of people seeing the hotel called Urban Beach presumed it was on the beach and would be a bit disappointed when they came and found out that we weren't on the beach. And I just thought if we could get a location on the seafront, that would be amazing. And it was a tender process with the council. And I was pretty good. I said I was pretty decent academic-wise. I'd got a distinction in my dissertation at university. And for me, it was just a dissertation. It was like a 120-page proposal to the council with branding and menus and ideas and concept and a sales pitch. And it was a good, it was a decent document I put together. Having said that, fundamentally, I think it came down to the amount of cash that I owed the council. I'd always been convinced that deals like that were done with little brown bags of cash, and I didn't have any. And it turned out it wasn't. You could literally put a proposal together, offer a decent amount of cash to the council. And I do remember getting the phone call. I was stood in reception at Urban Beach. Can't remember who it was, but somebody from the council called and just said, just to let you know, you've been successful. You've been awarded the contract for Urban Reef. And that's when, I absolutely crapped myself. And
I was going to say, what were the emotions that were going through you, or what were the thoughts that were going through your mind at that point?
I was very excited at that particular moment, really excited. I thought, wow, this is going to be amazing. What a dream it is. What a unique opportunity to get that location, panoramic views of the ocean out of every window. Just, couldn't believe it. But, and I can't, again, remember the exact timings, but just very quickly became the reality of, okay, Urban Beach had evolved over a period of time, and actually it was a mortgage on a freehold property. But how do you go about raising £500,000 to open a restaurant when you can't really leverage any asset? And by then, so what are we now, 2008, so we're in the midst of the sort of, global crash and recession. So the financial sort of situation had really changed. And I remember going to the bank, I'd refinanced, I think, already 3 times with the bank at that stage to constantly plough money back into Urban Beach. And I was like, great, good news, next project's come along, I need to raise another few £100,000, and it's down on the beach, amazing, what an opportunity, aren't we lucky? And it was Barclays at the time, and they just said, nah, we're not doing any more. We're out. Leisure is discretionary spend. We've had this global crash. We're just not going to invest in hospitality. And I was like, shit, this is a bit embarrassing. It's gone out in the paper now that I've been awarded the contract. I've gone through all this, but no point. I suppose I'd never really thought I was going to get it, and I certainly didn't think that I should probably get the money. It's a typical entrepreneur's way, I think, of say yes first and then work how afterwards. And I'd done exactly that. I'd gone, yeah. Of course we can do it. Of course we can. Absolutely. Bullshit baffles brains. And then all of a sudden there was this gaping hole. And that required some creativity to actually go out and raise the cash in all sorts of ways. From buying kitchen equipment on hire purchase to, where the hotel was successful, I could have things, nobody would lend to a new restaurant, but people would lend to an existing hotel. So I remember buying, new till systems, security systems, all the sort of things I was going to need, but just telling people they were for the hotel. They'd be financed via the hotel. They'd even be delivered to the hotel. I remember one lady coming in to check out the till system that she'd financed and paid for at the hotel. All till systems looked the same. And she came in just to make sure that it had all been installed okay and it was working okay. And I pointed around the building and said, yeah, great, brilliant, really good. It wasn't her till system. Her till system was down at the Urban Reef, down at the restaurant. But I couldn't tell her that because there's no way they would have allowed us to put it on finance. So we found some pretty creative ways of financing the building. We opened in May, got an absolute arse kicking. It was the most chaotic 5-6 months. But the really scary bit, going back to your earlier question, is, had you bitten off more than you can chew, was having sort of blagged my way into opening a restaurant. I remember getting a 2-page letter from my solicitor saying, do not start work on that restaurant. You don't have a lease in place. You won't be protected. But we had to be open for summer. As far as I was concerned, if we missed summer, we weren't going to have a restaurant anyway. We'd go bankrupt. So we'd risked absolutely everything. We'd begged, borrowed, and all the money. And we came to October. And this again goes back to that point that in the simplicity of a market business, where you open the doors in the morning, and when you close that night, you've got more money than you started with. All of a sudden, we started to hemorrhage cash. So we were losing £1,000 a day in November of that first winter. And I was like, right, I've got Urban Beach, which doesn't make any money in the winter anyway. But now I've added the complexity of this big seafront restaurant. For the first time, we've got big brigades of chef. We've got all of these people employed, and we're now losing £1,000 a day. And I was like, if that carries on for 6 weeks, then it's all over. We'll have lost the hotel, we'll have lost the restaurant, and we'll have lost my parents' business. And I remember feeling, physically sick, just walking around thinking I could actually puke. Literally, I could throw up. And what an interesting experiment that was, really. That just the mental kind of process of thinking about this could make you vomit on the spot. But again, it's a pretty good motivator to try and find a way out of it.
And there's a consistent theme, even if you look at, water pouring through the ceiling or opening the doors and thinking, right, how do I make this work? Convincing your parents that this was this is a viable business proposition. There's that theme around find a way, and I think it's that sense that entrepreneurship, whilst often glamorized, rarely does it focus on the sleepless nights and the find a way and the feelings of, absolutely to your point, that you're physically sick because of the stress that it's causing you to make these things work. But all credit you managed to find a way. You managed to, you've gone from strength to strength to strength to strength in terms of adding venues and building a brand that now today is Urban Guild and all of that would entail. But was there a moment where you thought it's not going to work? You've got, to your point, you've got the beach, you've got the reef at this point, you've got all of these pressures, losing £1,000 a day. Was there a point you thought, actually, maybe it's just time to go back to the health club, run a health club, take the easy life?
I definitely thought that maybe the bank were right not to lend me the money. I remember thinking, okay, yeah, maybe they do know something, because I had the gift of the gab. I was pretty good. I was very good at coping with stress. I kind of felt, I'm built for this. I can cut a lot of people. Wouldn't be able to cope with owing the bank over, I don't know, £1.5 million by this point, I suppose. And I was just like, they're just noughts. For me, it doesn't really matter if you owe £1.50 or 150 or 1.5, just cross the noughts. At the end of the day, if you've got to work to pay the bills, you've got to do it. So I don't think I was ever arrogant. I think I was always fairly humble, and I always, thought I would think I was, grateful. But I definitely thought, actually, you quite possibly you don't know it all. And these people who are in control of the purse strings, know. And I remember thinking that, the US has a much better culture from a sort of, make it and lose it and invest in businesses and take the punt probably than we do. And the stigma attached to failure, in the UK is much higher. But actually, even at that point, I don't actually remember thinking, we will lose it. I just thought, well, maybe they're right. Maybe they're right. It's not that they were right. And I was actually just really motivated. And the thing that's sort of become dangerous as life's gone on, I suppose, is that I now know that you've just got to take that first step. And if you take that first step, it may well end up being that you've got to go in a completely different direction. But at least by taking that first step, there's almost an inevitability that you will work it out. You'll either work it out or it will fail. And you shouldn't be afraid to just take that step. And now I laugh, with my wife. You look at the most recent restaurant that we opened, and maybe we'll come to that story, but I wasn't looking for a new restaurant, wasn't planning on opening one, and I remember chuckling to myself when I actually saw the space for the first time, and it's the sort of, I don't know, the scourge of being able to look out and into an empty space but see clinking glasses and see people sort of sat around chuckling and laughing, and see, just all in my head the sort of movie plays out. And I was like, chuckling to myself and terrified at the same time, thinking, oh God, because once I've seen it, I know that if we take that first step, it will probably happen. And it's so much earlier now than I used to know it. But I come back to my wife that night and had a chat. And like, if I press the go button on this, even though at the moment, we've got no idea, we haven't agreed leases or money or how would we raise the fund or anything about it. But I just know that if we start, we'll find a way and we'll end up with this thing. It's like visioning, I suppose, isn't it?
And where does that drive come from? What is it that drives you?
It's definitely not money. And I think you hear this, and it's become a bit of a cliche from entrepreneurs saying, they're not motivated by money. And I never was. And hence I didn't care probably about the level of debt I was in, because it wasn't about the money. I do think, work hard enough, do something that enough people want and enough people like, and you should end up with money. It's fair. It's a reasonable kind of, solution to what you're doing. But I don't think you can wake up every day in the morning and be excited about the thought of making more money. I'd be excited about, and still for me, people ask what I do, and really, and again, conscious that it sounds a bit cliche, but I really believe it, is that I sell time. I sell the time for people to spend with their families or their loved ones, or in a business meeting or a graduation or a wake or whatever it might be. And that definitely goes back to my time traveling, that falling in love with the touch points of humanity and that gratitude. When I was kneeling down in a paddy field in Indonesia, helping a local kid, in the fields just for a bit of fun for me, but this was this guy's life. And I remember chatting to him and, him telling me how lucky I was. And actually, from a sort of quality of life perspective, these guys had a great quality of life in the fact they had a lot of fun. They didn't have a lot of pressure. They were permanently sort of laughing. They were very happy people. But I was like, yeah, there's no getting away from the fact that what I've got that you haven't got is a passport and a credit card. And with a passport and a credit card, I could do anything really that I wanted in the world. Whereas this guy's destiny, was to stay in the village, I suppose. But that really taught me about all of these different levels of humanity and gratitude. So when in hospitality, and the reason we didn't have a loyalty card for many years is I was kind of like, every single person who comes into this business every time should just be treated with the same amount of, respect and love that you'd give your family. It doesn't matter whether it's their first visit or their 20th visit, just really look after them and just make their day a little bit brighter and a little bit better. So what you do in that split second can change the trajectory of the entire day for that human being. Just how you make them feel. They might have only been in the building for 5 or 10 minutes. And also it didn't matter whether it was a customer or a supplier or, anybody that we came into contact with. I just love this opportunity to make that person feel sort of special for that period of time. I don't know why that is. I think hospitality is a reflex. It's kind of like if you walked into my house, chances are, I'd say, do you want a cup of tea or a cup of coffee or a glass of water? And not everybody would. But I'd also probably think about, what level's the lighting and what level's the music and what's the candles, what's the ambience. You see these things sort of three-dimensionally, I suppose, even at quite a young age. And I'm not actually, a party goer. I'm not a big drinker, and actually out of work, I'm not even massively sociable. And I'm certainly not the sort of person who, will walk into a room and be particularly, extroverted. But where it's my job and my responsibility, I'm good at it. And I'll notice those 1,000 details that will make somebody feel better in that space. And I love that. I love being able to look at a space and think, how could you make people enjoy this space? And when you walk into a space that isn't working, and I won't mention the name, but I remember as a friend's mum who'd regularly host parties. She's going to listen to this and know who it is. But you'd go to the party and just, there'd be no music and the lighting would be wrong. And you'd sit there going, my goodness, it'd be so easy. In 90 seconds, I could change the whole ambience of how this space feels, but knowing that, it wasn't your responsibility to do it. But I feel very lucky that now I get to do that. I get to create spaces and have a little bit of a play and create these three-dimensional atmospheres where people will sit in that space and feel really good for a period of time. And I don't know why I like that, but I do.
So what does success mean to you?
Yeah, I guess that's an evolving thing, I suppose. Success in the early days was just survival, a bit of pride, a bit of like, let's prove the naysayers wrong. Let's pay my parents back, which I've done, which was good. And then it probably became a little bit more around family and kind of like, okay, actually, I should probably try and make sure that, my kids have got somewhere where they feel safe and secure. We moved house, I think something like 10 times in 8 years because we were renting, because all of the money was tied up in the business. And that was fairly disruptive for my wife and my kids. We'd be renting, and people who said they were going to rent long term wanted to sell the house or move back in or whatever. And we'd just constantly be sort of nomadic and on the move. So the motivation became, although I'm not financially motivated, I probably should try and get enough cash out of this business that I can actually buy, a nice home. And then now maybe it's a little bit more, about having conversations like this, about inspiring people, about creating nice jobs. I like the fact that if you're going to work in hospitality, work with us. It's a really tough sector, but can I look at the quality of life for the people that I work with? Can we try and not do, too many double shifts? Can we try and make sure that we look after people long term? Or, so many of my team have got married and had their own kids now, or even met at our place of employment and had their kids. So can I create an environment where their kids feel sort of, stable? So I think the motivations are constantly evolving. And now I suppose, I do my own podcast where I get to go and chat to sort of my heroes of the sector in the industry about food and drink, and probably particularly around the environment and, our impact on the planet, and tread lightly. I suppose really, growth and learning are probably, my biggest motivators. My biggest success is that as long as I'm learning and as long as I'm growing in whatever guise that may be, then I'm generally pretty happy. But that's easier to say if you've got some level of financial security, which I still don't think we've nailed, to be fair.
And so tell us where you're at today. So what does Urban Guild, so you go back to starting out with Urban Beach, Urban Guild, what does that look like as a brand, as a collective, as a group of businesses today?
Yeah, so I think Guild came along. I think we had Urban Beach, we had Urban Reef. Urban Beach was this idea of city quality, so London kind of decadence meets the coast, so beach sort of customer service and level of informality. Urban Reef came along because we opened a place on the beach and it was overlooking an artificial surf reef, and I was like, okay, it's a proper reef, but it's been built in a city centre. Urban Reef, that works really well. And it was kind of after those that we realised we were starting to try and find words that fitted. So we opened a little cafe in a museum and we called it Urban Renaissance because it was sort of after the sort of the arts and crafts kind of movement and history. And then it was actually when Jenkins and Sons came along, which was a place that had so much history and old butchers and fishmongers over in Penn Hill. I didn't feel comfortable calling it an urban. It had always been a Jenkins and Sons for a long time prior to it becoming what became Banks Bistro. And I just thought, why are we trying to use this word urban too much? And I was like, but by this point, we had them all sort of separately branded. People did want a loyalty card. We wanted a centralized website. And we thought, we've just created this very complicated beast. Much easier to come up with one name, one concept, and roll it out to a few locations. But each one was individually designed to the location that it was in. So we came up with this name, Urban Guild, and a guild is a collection of artisans that looks after its craft in a town. And I was like, that's great. I never had aspirations really, although we discussed it, at quite some length, whether we should try and roll out something nationally or open in other towns. We were always, that wasn't our motivation. We just wanted to create, do less, but do it better. So a guild, a collection of artisans. And by this point I'd got into, where the food was from, where the coffee was from. We're very privileged to just represent these incredible obsessives behind. And that's why I love this sector so much, is there'll be somebody who'll obsess about chocolate or coffee or gin or the best beef or whatever it might be. And we just represent them. So I was like, yep, Guild's a great name. So we built, a brand called Guild, and just little soft touch points. So, again, the crockeries branded Guild, or the web, the overall website's branded Guild. And a lot of people have never heard of Urban Guild. A lot of people locally will know Urban Reef, or they'll know Urban Beach. They would have no idea that Jenkins and Sons was us, and it's not anymore. Now we have got Urban Garden, and we're back into the world of urban, because I probably went, actually, people do recognize that brand and it's got some benefits. But yeah, so now as things stand, we've added stuff, we've taken stuff away, we've definitely failed at some bits. But right now we've got Urban Beach, so the original, the hotel, that's actually on the market for sale as well. We've got Urban Reef, so that's the beast, that's the crazy business on the seafront, which ended up doing sort of 2.5 million turnover. So it's a real beast of a place, but we're still learning how to run that one because it hemorrhages so much cash in the winter, makes it in the summer. We've got the Wood Oven, which is a wood-fired pizza place next door, again, right on the seafront. And we've got a new one that we opened about 18 months ago. So it's probably been closed more than it's been open since we got it, called Urban Garden, which is right in the town centre, overlooking the gardens. And actually, I think Urban Reef and Urban Garden could be two incredible businesses. One with the best views of the ocean, one with the best views of the gardens in the town centre. And the hotel will probably sell given the opportunity. And then, we'll see what happens with some other bits. But, we've learned enough along the way, I think, to do less better rather than more less well.
It would be amiss of me to not reflect on where we are today. Here we sit here recording this on 8th of February 2021 in the midst of well-documented midst of a global pandemic, which is a once in a lifetime seismic event that has clearly had well-documented seismic impact on the hospitality industry. Arguably, as I sit here, I think of, are there other industries that have been impacted in quite such a brutal fashion? And I suspect there would be lots of people who would hold up a hand and say, hey, us too. But on reflection, I can't think of too many. So, I mean, it's been a torrid time, Mark, and yet you always have been, whenever I've met you, incredibly upbeat, incredibly positive, a real force of nature in terms of just exuding that positivity. I appreciate there will be times where that's incredibly difficult to maintain. But how has all this affected you, and how has all this affected, in your view, your industry?
Yeah, I mean, tough, for the industry, I suppose, just heartbreaking, to be honest, to see so many good operators. It's interesting because we'd gone through a period of growth as a sector pre-pandemic that was equally as depressing in some ways. We'd seen this rollout of national chains. The reason that I started, my own podcast in hospitality was off the back of driving over to France one year to go and do some riding in the mountains. And we drove all through the night and we got to the base of Alpe d'Huez, and I looked out over this little village. So we got there about 7 a.m, and luckily the boulangerie was open, and we nipped in and we bought a croissant and an espresso, and we sat there, and there was this incredible energy, in the room. And I looked out across the square of this little town, and there was 3 or 4 other little coffee shops and boulangeries that were open, and proper French people coming in and buying their bread, and just this lovely food culture and this lovely energy. And I look back and I was like, why is it that in England, in this industry that I love and have spent the last sort of 15 years in, why do I know that lots of people will be going to a garage and pressing the button on an automated, Costa coffee machine and getting their coffee without even speaking probably to another human being, and getting in their car and carrying on their journey? And why don't we have this culture? And I thought, we're sleepwalking into this, because if you sit down and you speak to people and you say, well, what do you like about travel? Do you love the fact that, you recognize all the restaurants and it's all the same chains as home? Or do you love finding that little bakery or that little deli or that little, bar, that taverna in a square where, you can get a decent beer? And everybody pretty much, kind of loves that quirky independence. And we didn't have that in the UK. And I was trying to work out why. And I do think it's the city. I think it's London and the stock market and the venture capitalists and people always looking for money, maybe in the US and the UK more than maybe in Europe, where maybe we're a little bit more unionized and maybe we recognize some of the other benefits of life rather than just cash. So I was watching my sector with an element of depression at these sort of rollouts. When Pizza Express ended up being owned by a Chinese investment company, owing 1.1 billion in debt. So it was over over 3 million per restaurant. And I was like, how can each restaurant, they can't be worth 3 million. How can each restaurant be 3 million pounds in debt? And I was just like, we've skewed the water of hospitality. So in some ways there was this sort of need for a correction in my sector, but I would personally have loved that correction to be, some of the really boring, tedious, beige multinationals that end up on every street corner. Because for me, one of the lovely things about hospitality is there's not too many barriers to entry. You don't have to have gone off and studied for 10 years to be a lawyer or a surgeon or a doctor or whatever. You can pretty much start with a street food wagon on a market and learn your concept and build up, and therefore you end up with this really vibrant, energized space full of creatives. There's more people in my business who probably own a guitar and some crayons than own a laptop, and that's what I love. So we needed a correction, but we didn't need a correction this big, we didn't need it to hit the rest of the industry. But in some ways, let's say, so rents had gone up, cost of staff had gone up. It was becoming incredibly difficult to actually run restaurants successfully. Look at Mark Hicks, well-known restaurateur, already lost a couple of his restaurants very early in the pandemic, lost all of them. And now, fortunately, he's reopened. But, good restaurateurs were failing before we went into the pandemic, which is where I sympathise with the government, I suppose. Having said that, the people coming off the back of this are the people that, the big companies in many ways that have raised a lot of money. It was very depressing to read this week that McDonald's had actually grown their sales this year by 0.9%. Kentucky Fried Chicken had grown the sales in the last quarter of this year by 14%. They'd only gone down 2% in the whole year. And that's just, depressing. And then, the businesses that are doing well off the back of this are the ones that have got the money, to invest in online and the big businesses, the Amazons of the world. But, I'm sort of depressed to see how hard it's hurt the sector. Not just the front facing, and some beautiful, good independent restaurants have gone. Some over leveraged chains have gone, and I'm less worried about that. But also really good suppliers, really good fishmongers and butchers, have always specialised in hospitality and growers. And I really hope that we're hibernating and we're going to come off the back of this into a sort of period of utopia. And I hope that the public remember, who has stood tall in this crisis, who has supported the community. Because one thing going into this is hospitality, I don't think was particularly well respected. I think it was seen as a student job, it's seen as a gap job. But I think more and more of us, having it taken away from us for the last year, have realised how much we crave that social interaction, and how we might think that Netflix and a Deliveroo is utopia, but actually, we miss that face-to-face contact. So I think off the back of this, there is going to be a potential sort of upsurge in people just being a bit more grateful and maybe a little bit more respectful for hospitality. And because we've held our head high and we've served the vulnerable and we've looked after the NHS, and so much of hospitality has given away its food and coped with ridiculous sort of government decisions and being closed down. Even the most recent lockdown, it was the 30th of December, and it was quite late. It was like 6 o'clock in the afternoon, and the next day was New Year's Eve. Obviously, we're all booked out for New Year's Eve. You can only leave the preparation of food to a certain time. So if you're in retail, you might just be able to leave the clothes in the cupboard potentially. But in hospitality, everything's been prepped, everything's been bought in. You look at the investment the sector would put into outside spaces, into being COVID safe, into marquees outside. The being vilified was the most depressing thing to see. The data was showing that transmission was happening in people's homes. It was happening in the workplace. It was happening in education. It wasn't happening in hospitality because you were met at the door, because you were kept a decent distance apart, because we were insisting that you anti-backed when you came in, that you wore masks, if you stood up. You were taking people from a very well-regulated environment where there was very little transmission and then putting them into, less managed environments like people's homes. So very frustrating to see the millions of pounds wasted and an industry being sort of vilified. And I've gone off on a few tangents, but it's been heartbreaking. In some ways, some sort of necessary correction, and mainly I'm excited for the future, with the caveat of do the government really understand how on its knees the sector is? If they don't extend, it's no good coming out and saying you can have a 5% VAT rate for a year and then us not being able to trade for that year. We've been closed. We've only actually traded for 9 weeks of this financial year properly, 9 weeks. And that was in July, August and the start of September. November we were shut, Jan, Feb, March we were shut. December the tiers were so ridiculous there was no point opening. So 9 weeks trade. That needs to be extended. The business rates relief needs to be extended. We need to rebuild. Everybody says, you've had furlough, but furlough is only costing the company's money. Furlough's costing me 12 grand a month at the moment, just to keep my team employed, because it's the right thing to do. And I really, I love my team. There's lots of them that work with me for over 10 years, but it makes much more financial sense to lose, way more of them and to start from scratch in April. But, as an industry, we work in hospitality because we like people. So we're trying to look after them. And then, the rent cliff that's coming up, this moratorium that keeps getting extended, where we're kicking the sort of the rent problem down the road. So we're going to have a year's worth, a lot of people, a year's worth of unpaid rent. And there needs to be some sort of shared burden, some sort of compromise between the landlords and the tenants. And some landlords are doing that, but lots are not. And they're just waiting for the moratorium to run out to take legal action. Obviously a business that's been shut for 12 months doesn't have the money to pay backdated rent. It's going to need to be given, A, time, but B, share the burden. So I worry for what's going to happen when we do reopen. But I do think, with overseas travel looking challenging, we could be in for a bumper season. But that's not about hospitality, raking in loads of cash. That's just about getting ourselves out of the shit. I've borrowed 300 grand CBILS debt. I owe over 100 grand in backdated rent. I owe over 150 grand in backdated VAT. It's going to take me 5 years to dig myself out of the hole that we're in, but at least give the sector a chance. And I hope the Exchequer aren't greedy and don't just look at this sort of pent up demand, don't just look at the fact people can't go abroad and go, well, hospitality is going to be fine. It's like, give us the chance to rebuild. We've been in the eye of the storm. We've only traded for 9 weeks, and we're going to need, at least 12 months just to get ourselves the cash flow to survive, future cycles, particularly in tourism towns of sort of, feast and famine of seasonality. That was a long answer, Lee.
No, just fascinating. What would you do? Have you any solutions or ideas or thoughts that you might feel comfortable sharing that you think could go a long way to alleviating some of the challenges to which you refer?
Really difficult with rent, to ask the government to step into a relationship between landlord and tenant is so difficult, but clearly doing nothing isn't working. I'd love to have had the time to look a little bit more into what's happened in other countries. France and Germany just seem to have gone, much more generous with the grant side of the business. Laughable, I think, that up until the end of December, if you take Urban Reef, my biggest business on the seafront, £2.5 million turnover, probably spend maybe 200 grand a year in taxes, in VAT and NI and all sorts of other stuff. And we'd been given £3,000 grant support. That's all we'd been given. From March, when we went into lockdown, to the end of December, £3,000. It's all well and good for the government to go out and say the support's there. Yes, you can go and get into debt, but you've got to pay that back. And anybody with a rateable value over £51,000 didn't qualify for grant support. So if your rateable value was £50,000 in hospitality, you got a 25 grand grant in the early stages of the year. One of my businesses, I think, is 51.7k, so it got zero. So you go from 25k to zero. So that support was laughable. So if you don't want the government to step into the relationship with tenant and landlord, then give bigger grants. Look at what's been happening in France and Germany, where they're giving 20% of the turnover of the business. If you look at overall Guild, probably pays £500,000 a year in taxes. Yeah. So if I had 150k back, just one quarter, for example, or 125k, at one quarter's tax payments back, that would give me the opportunity to get myself out of the crap, to maybe to sort out some debt with the landlords. Again, I'd say let's share it, let's share that burden, give us a start point. But to do nothing, to just keep kicking the can down the road, is silly. I do think they need to come out soon and reassure us that 5% VAT will be given for another 12 months, because as it stands at the moment, lots of us are in a position where we could be laying off more people because we don't know when we're going to be able to open. If we're not opening until May, why am I keeping my team on, in Jan, Feb, March, April, when I don't need them? I could start again recruitment. But, dangle that carrot, demonstrate to us that we will be given the opportunity to trade strongly once we reopen. And I appreciate the backdrop all to that is the complication of the numbers, isn't it? The COVID numbers. I don't say the government are wrong to do what they've done, even though clearly some of the decisions were stupid. The curfew, the 10 p.m. curfew, you can only have alcohol with a substantial meal. Coming out this week and saying that pubs can reopen but they can't sell booze. Some of the stuff is just stupid. Not understanding the sector, not understanding that if you're in a country house hotel and you're being told at 10 o'clock that you've got to go to bed, even though you're only going upstairs and you're coming back down the following morning, and all you're doing then is compressing the time period that people who are staying in that hotel have got to eat, because all of a sudden the restaurants in the hotel have got to serve all of the guests between 7 and 10 instead of maybe 7 and 11. So instead of 2 sittings, you're doing 1 sitting. They don't understand the industry and the stupidity of some of the decisions they were making. So I think engage better. We were fighting for a Minister of Hospitality to say, look, can we get a seat at the table? We're one of the biggest employers in the country. We employ 3 million people. We're really good at giving young people jobs. We're really good at giving creative people who maybe haven't followed normal academia routes jobs. And we're really good at developing those people potentially into, well-paid careers. It's not like the hospitality of old, where everybody was on terrible money, the living wage, but actually even that's irrelevant. My chefs are on, 40, 45k a year. It's a decent wage in a decent industry for people who probably don't have another route. They're not going to go and work in a bank. What would they be doing? So support this incredibly vibrant, energized sector. We're the backbone of happiness of Britain. We are birthdays, we are anniversaries, we are, the point behind life, basically, of being human is to spend time with our other human beings. We create that opportunity. We create meeting spaces. It's not like, 20 years ago, if you're going out, the fact that you pay VAT on food if you go into a restaurant, but you don't pay it if you go and buy the ingredients in a supermarket. We've all got accustomed to a faster pace of life. We're out and about in our days and we pop into a cafe and we grab our lunch. We didn't used to be able to afford to do that, but get rid of the crazy tax burden that's just there on day-to-day life. Let us, create this kind of happiness, this culture of well-being in humanity, and tax the bloody online, super giants who aren't really making people happy. It's convenient to get something delivered in a box, isn't it? But it's not as much fun as going to a pub with your mates and looking them in the eye. And the business meetings that take place in all these, amazing hospitality venues that there's nowhere else for those to take place. That's where people go, isn't it? If two businesses want to meet, where's the middle ground? Just meet in a coffee shop or in a bar or outside a restaurant on a beach and have a conversation. So if we're doing so much good for society, let's be better recognised as an industry and as a sector. So that would be my plea to Boris and Rishi. If you could get this in front of them, please, Lee. Thank you.
Well, I think you talk an awful lot of sense.
Really?
Absolutely, in my opinion. But I think not least, I think interested in your point from the outset about the riot in France and the demise of the sort of why don't we have that kind of cafe culture? And it struck me that as you were talking about that, you look at the demise of the village pub, that used to provide that hub of that centre of the community from which so much used to spin off, that all of a sudden, I won't mention any specific chains by name, but all of a sudden they've been eroded slowly but surely out of so much of the landscape of the UK. But my sense is, I think you're right. We are by nature social creatures. We are socially wired, intertwined. We want to engage. And that doesn't necessarily, some people love to be in a room of 50, some love to be in a room of 5. But actually we're all, to a varying degree, socially wired, and my sense is, like you, that will come back. And there's this pent up demand. We have I have a bunch of my oldest pals. There are anywhere between 10 and 12 of us every Friday night on a Zoom, because we can't meet for a pint anymore. And the one thing that stems from that is that, we were talking about it last Friday night. Every single one of us unanimously said, without any hesitation, the one thing we miss is that Friday night pint or that Saturday morning coffee or that bike ride and a coffee and cake afterwards. Just sitting down, shooting the breeze. We talk a lot of nonsense. We have great laughs. We need that, in varying degrees. People need that. Families need that. So I like you, my hope is that comes back with abundance, that, we unleash the floodgates of hospitality, because it is a wonderful industry. And I think I've also seen that shift. It struck me for years that hospitality in the UK almost felt a little bit like something you did between, school and university, or you went and got a bar job or something. Whereas, say for example, in a lot of the Mediterranean countries, being a waiter was a really prestigious job and responsibility. Hospitality of an industry itself has done a wonderful job of shifting that dynamic, actually, and raising its profile and making, a hugely viable career choice for so many people. And to your point, I just think the government needs to support it better, as it does in many industries. I think the disconnect between reality, what happens at the coalface, versus what government imagines happens in Whitehall, are distinctly different, and we need to find a way of making that connection.
Yeah, and there's no getting away from the fact, it is a tough sector. You are asking people to compromise. They are working on a Friday and Saturday night. It always
struck me it's a lifestyle choice in many ways. To your point, your time, and what is a 9-to-5 world these days, particularly with working from home, but your time, your work time, is often seeing people having their downtime.
Yeah, and that can be a tough compromise, particularly once you've got a family. But just to go back to your point on community pubs, is that, and I've interviewed a few, in my podcast, and you forget just how important a part of that community are. But some of them have stepped up and become the sort of nucleus again for the local village during COVID, and I think people have recognised that. It's been the local pub that's become a food distribution point, that's been, the way of checking on the neighbours and communicating that they've set themselves up as a little retail shop so that people can go in there and, just representing their suppliers, come in and, just buy the ingredients. And they're not doing this because it's profitable, but it's keeping the community going, it's keeping the suppliers going. So, the government have always tried to demonise booze, but I think that the overall shift in culture now is drink less, drink better. It's not about cheap booze. We might have, a couple of beers, and they might be more hoppy, more flavoursome, maybe a stronger beer. Or you might go to the pub in the morning and have a coffee, meet your mates, or on a cycle ride, nip into the pub and have a coffee and a slice of cake. I think we've moved away. That's just, the health kind of conversation that's going on has changed anyway. And you can't vilify pubs and people that sell alcohol. It's just stupidity to come out with this rule that says, you can reopen, but you can't sell alcohol because then you all become idiots. It's just bonkers. If I want to go and stay in a hotel for the weekend with my wife and sit there one evening and, we share a bottle of wine and a meal, what on earth am I going to be doing differently that's COVID unsafe compared to COVID safe? Again, it's just the government being lazy and looking at the images of, packed town centres and busy bars, but that's the exception to the norm. Hospitality is the coffee shop in the museum. It's the place at the end of the pier that sells you an ice cream. It's going to the theatre and finding that place, in reception where you can buy a glass of wine or a gin and tonic and go in and watch something. It's everything, at every single different level. There's not many people that can't afford to buy a hot dog on the side of a street or an ice cream at the end of the pier. But to vilify the industry and say that, you're all about trying to make people fat or get them drunk is just ridiculous. We're about the happiness of humanity.
We don't vilify the supermarkets. Yeah, I can walk into the supermarket and buy, a crate of beer at a fraction of the price of what I could get a pint in the pub.
Yeah.
So, you make a really valid point. Tell me about your own podcast, Humans of Hospitality. I mean, where did there's a lot of creative theme consistent throughout your career. But where did the inspiration for, you talked a little bit about perhaps some of the frustrations that you were seeing or some issues that you felt passionate about?
Yeah, basically sat in that coffee shop that I mentioned in France and realising that somebody was pressing that button on a vending machine. I thought, this is knowledge. There's very few people that if I ask them, who do you want to support? Do you want to support the big multinational that doesn't care? Or do you want to support the little guy? And through working in hospitality, I just met these incredible humans, these incredible suppliers. I remember when Dave, my Eggman, came in to see me one morning, many years ago, and he said, "Mark," and he looked a little bit like a hen because he had a little bit of flabby skin under his chin, and he said, "Do you know that you should poach your eggs in spring and summer? Spring and autumn, and you should scramble them in the winter and in the summer?" And I was like, "No, I didn't. Are you bonkers? Why?" And he's like, happy hens lay the best eggs. So, hens don't like to be too hot. They don't like to be too cold. So they love spring and they love autumn. When they're at their happiest, they lay the best eggs. And the best eggs are the ones that you should poach. And the ones that are slightly, less good are the ones that you should scramble. And I was just like, I love the fact that this guy, is so tuned into the happiness of his hens. He knows when they're laying the best eggs and what you should do with it. And I started to realize that there's that sort of person. And not even that long ago in hospitality, I wanted to control everything. I wanted to roast our own coffee. I wanted to brew our own beer. I wanted to bake our own bread, not because I'm a control freak, just because I loved learning about how to do it. But then I realized that there's these crazy obsessives in each one of those. The level of detail you go into is insane. So, for many years when I train my team, one of the most popular things we sell is a burger, which could be a bit depressing because it's a pretty easy bit of food. But I'm like, look, the amount of human beings that have touched that thing. And the one example I always give is, the baker who bakes the rolls for your burger has never taken his kids to school because the compromise he makes is that he gets up at 3:00 every day to bake the bun. I said, so think about the human beings that are behind every single dish that you have, whether it's the potato, just a portion of chips, but somewhere is a farm and they're digging up those potatoes. So now I go off and I get to meet these obsessives, the best chocolatier in the country, a chap called Will Curley, or the best gin makers, or the best chefs, or beekeepers, the world of bees, the fact that without bees, there'll be no pollination of our food, and without the pollination of our food, we'll probably die of starvation. And these, the unsung heroes of hospitality are actually, the bees. And the answer to bees isn't, and the stuff I learned, but it isn't to go and get more, hives in your garden and more honeybees, because actually it's the honeybees are really kind of, they're quite an aggressive species for getting nectar out of plants. And actually we need more wild bees. So better off planting flowers than you are in getting beehives. Whatever it is, those are just examples of this crazy bonkers, level of knowledge. Regenerative farming, the fact that, we've got this crazy monoculture obsession about efficiency in farming, which was great after the war because we needed to work out how to feed people. But actually from a diversity perspective, constantly, putting artificial chemicals and fertilizers on the land because of our obsession for efficiency and growing one single ingredient like a grain is crazy compared to, regenerative farming. And a bit like hospitality, the answer to farming is probably to bring it closer back to the villages, to have smaller farms, that sort of, cross breed or cross grow lots of different sort of species and lots of different plants, but, do less. Monoculture, the big industry, all of this stuff is kind of destroying the planet. But I don't have all the answers, but I love going and asking the questions and finding out about, where's the better place. And hospitality, it's so broad. We all eat and drink every single day. hospitality, food, agriculture has a bigger impact on the planet than travel, than fossil fuels, than everything else we do. It's what we choose to eat every day has the biggest impact. So I just love going and meeting these crazy obsessives who've spent years, perfecting their art, Laverstoke Farm and their mozzarella, and working out how many kind of different types of grass and how many different herbs they should feed the buffalo to make the best mozzarella. What sort of person has got 5 years and enough money to obsess about a cow's diet to find out, how to make the best mozzarella? Lunatics. The industry's full of absolute mental people. But I think if I can tell their stories and get people excited about it, then when they're walking down the high street and they think, right, I can go right and I can go into that big anonymous branded chain, flying their ingredients off from these huge farms, from wherever's most efficient in the world, or I can go left and I can go and speak to an actual human being who knows his supply chain, it isn't about organic, it's about looking your supplier in the eye, into the whites of their eyes and saying, look, would you feed your kids these ingredients that you're growing? And do you feel like you're a custodian, here on planet Earth for such a short period of time that you're looking after the ground and the land and all that kind of stuff? That's who you buy from. So education, get the consumer to understand. So the motivation behind the podcast is just to say, look, could more people give a shit about where food and drink comes from? And if they do, I think we'll end up living on a better planet. That comes back to how do you define success? Now my motivation is shared knowledge from what I've learned over the last, 15, 16 years.
So who inspires you?
I guess, different people for different reasons. I've always, again, that treat everybody the same comes down to, I never really sort of, wowed by celebrities, I suppose. But I suppose, I treat everybody with the same level of respect. And I find everybody fascinating. I find it as interesting to sit down in a room with Rishi and Boris and have a chat with them about, what they're trying to do now, as sitting down with, Richard Branson, or I'd probably draw the line at Trump. I'd rather never hear that name again in my life, actually. There's a certain level where I go, actually, I don't really give a shit what you've got to say. I just find you quite an obnoxious prick. But avoiding people like that, there's different people in different sectors. The people that I've interviewed, Tom from the Open Air Dairy, who looked at cows and said, right, the average lifespan of a dairy cow is 20 months. They're milked maybe 3 or 4 times a day. They're kept pregnant. They die young because they're overused. And he went, not actually motivated by the welfare of the cow originally, but financially, as to not being able to afford all the factory and all the kit that you get, but started to milk cows in a field, open air dairy. Let's take the dairy to the cows. Let's let the cows live outside, eating a natural diet. Now his cows live maybe 8, 9, 10 years. They're only milked twice a day. Happy cows, better milk, better product. He's a hero. He's a hero just for taking something that is such an abused kind of creature, the modern dairy cow, and taking something that you feel guilty about and going, look, it can be beautiful again. So different people for different things, I suppose, but probably, there's no sort of, the easy answers like, your Branson-esque and stuff like that. And much as I'd love to sit down and have a coffee and a beer with him, I'm equally as excited about chatting to the person who specialises in vertical farming this Thursday about why vertical farming might have less of an impact on nature than, big farm monoculture.
So how do you unwind? Do you unwind? If so, what is it that you would do?
Yeah, pretty good, really. I think I've got a dog. I go and walk the dog. I live by the ocean, which is great. Just been at outside twice a day, walk the dog. Got quite into cycling. Again, I suppose a little bit obsessive with anything I get into. I did get into cycling in quite a big way. So my longest ride ended up at being 190 miles in a day. But I've done a number of sort of multi-day, 4 or 5 days, 100 miles a day across the country. Just climbing a mountain, climbing a mountain on a bike in Europe, the big mountains that might take 2 or 3 hours to climb is quite a meditative process. You just get into a rhythm and you know what your cadence is and you know what your heart rate is. And if my cadence is sat at 90 and my heart rate's at 150, I can climb a mountain for 3 hours and all you think about is just staying in that rhythm. So that's quite meditative. And then, family and kids, and I've got lockdown has encouraged me to actually start growing some of my own stuff. So, I've done a bit of work to the garden, grew a load of produce yesterday afternoon. I sound like a right hippie, but, my wife was like, I'm going to go to the shops, we need some parsnips and how would you cook this cabbage? And I was like, well, I chop up some leeks and cook those in a little bit of butter and some garlic and some ginger and stuff. But I've got leeks in the garden, I'll go and cut them down. And then I've got parsnips in the garden, and I get out there and I dig it up and wash it and roast it. And I think, holy shit, that food is so much better than anything she would have nipped to the local Tesco Express and bought. And we're by no means self-sufficient. And then I just think, God, you're getting old, Cribby. What are you doing with your life? But I'm pretty good. Even when things have been really stressful, and even through this pandemic, and even, there's a fairly famous video of me out, nigh on sobbing right in the early stages of the pandemic with the stress of that was predominantly motivated by looking after the team and the responsibility of having 100 people that you employ, and me going, look, I can afford to pay you your next paycheck and then that's it, we're out of money. But even through those moments, I've always been fairly lucky at my body seems to cope well with stress. I hope either that or I'll die of cancer youngly, but fingers crossed. Externally it seems to be doing all right.
So what advice would you give 21-year-old Mark Cribb?
Yeah, what would I actually say with what I know now? I suppose be curious, and I guess I always was, but I see my kids now, I suppose, and home learning and what they're being told to learn, and I guess we're so bombarded now with YouTube and Netflix. My son will be doing his work and then he's got 3 screens. He's got the computer he's working on, his phone's doing something, his iPad's doing something, the radio's on. They've got this amazing ability to multitask, but they don't get into the detail. They don't really care about stuff. So I would probably say, just be curious. Every single person you meet, maybe be a little bit more present. I probably met some incredible humans over, certainly when I was traveling and over life. But when you're young, you take it for granted. Really, you're moving at the speed of sound, and I was very focused and very driven, and maybe things get sort of pushed aside. And maybe you need that. Maybe you need that to sort of deliver what you want to deliver. But now I'd probably say, when you can, be more present. Probably get into maybe meditation and sort of being more conscious, living in the moment a little bit more younger, and then maybe that would have just fast-tracked some of the stuff that I learned later, I suppose. But business-wise, I don't think there's anything really. It's like, be scared, just don't be afraid to push it, and but be confident that you'll work it out. And the biggest one I always say to people is just start. Just start. We all get this paralysis of analysis all of the time, and sometimes I just say, look, stop worrying about it. Just start. You'll work it out, basically, whichever way it goes.
So, what does the future look like for Mark Cribb?
I think maybe doing less, but doing it better. So I think I've scratched the itch of expansion to a certain level. So, what you say no to is often more important than what you say yes to. I think that's probably something I should have told myself at 21. So, opportunities crop up all of the time now. And I'm not very good at saying no, but I am much more conscious now of the limitations of what can be achieved. And not even that I can't work 100-hour weeks anymore, because I just can't work as hard as I used to. It would seem my brain can't focus for as long, but I definitely don't want to. I want to learn to kite surf, and I want to go and hang out outside. I love camping. I love going to the mountains. So really, I'm sort of caught between this dilemma of my kids are still pretty young, 11 and 13, so they're at school, so I can't travel probably as much as I'd want, because what I really want to do is go and hang out in nature and in the beauty, and find some sort of sweet spot, work-life balance, I suppose, where maybe you work for 3 months and take 6 weeks off or something like that. But in reality, opportunities keep presenting themselves. And as I said, I'm not very good. If I go to a space and I see it, and in my head it starts to exist as to what it could be, then inevitably we end up creating it. So I think if I can surround myself by a good enough team, and maybe if we start to get some external investment, then I think we might do some more projects. But I think we'll only do the ones that are good fun, that are well-financed, a little bit less stressful, and that are really interesting. We're probably not going to do too much sort of obscure backstreet stuff. It doesn't mean we need to be, and I probably wouldn't do seafront unless there was a car park, but there's some nice parts of town, some nice parks, there's some nice open spaces. And I think we can do better than a lot of people, because, we care about the environment, we care about our suppliers, we care about educating kids about where food comes from. So, the more collaborative stuff, like I say, getting away from that idea of, roast your own beans and grow your own food. Now I know so many amazing suppliers. And if we can collaborate with those suppliers, we've got these great artisan coffee makers locally. So, Bad Hand Coffee or BH24 for bread, or 8 Arch and Bad Hands for beer, these local obsessives. Can we just collaborate? So if we can create spaces where all of these awesome human beings can sell their produce, and my skill set might be gift of the gab to get those buildings or to get the investment or to coordinate them, to bring all of those people together. But I'd like to do stuff that really represents, the heart of the local food and drink community as and when they present themselves. So there's a few things on the horizon that may or may not happen. And the other thing's just being a lot more relaxed about it. So somebody got in touch recently with an opportunity and I was like, look, all I want to do this year is rebuild the business, trade for a good summer, get back on our feet. Can we meet for a coffee or a beer, towards the latter stage of summer, and we'll look at it maybe for a project next winter. Whereas before I would have been like, if somebody asked to meet, I'd go, yeah, of course, let's meet tomorrow. Yeah, great. Where should we go? Was now I'm kind of like, look, yeah, not in so much of a hurry, Lee, I suppose. So we'll just do stuff that's interesting and maybe take a little bit more time over it than we used to.
Fantastic. Well, I know that I'm certain I speak for many when I say that we're all very much looking forward to the day when those doors open and that we can
so
share a beer, a coffee, a pizza, a burger, whatever it might be. Some of the wonderful food and some of the wonderful establishments that you own and do such a great job for so many. So I guess on behalf of listeners and those, where can we find you? If we go to Humans of Hospitality, I would imagine available all the major podcast places, but social media, all those sorts of things. How can they?
Yeah,
where can they find you? How can they reach
easy.
out?
I think I'm pretty much Mark Cribb on all of them. So Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. I'm pretty much just Mark Cribb is the handle. humansofhospitality.co.uk is the website, or urbanguild.co.uk for the business side of things. But yeah, just Google Mark Cribb, and much to my son and daughter's horror and embarrassments, I seem to come up, and I've generally got an opinion or two on a few things. So you'll track me down. Although I'm not brilliant at social media, to be honest. I'm not on there as much as I should be. But you can. I'm easy to get hold of.
Fantastic. Mark, I've really appreciated your time. You offered great insight this morning. There's some really big issues out there for the hospitality industry that I know you speak very eloquently and passionately about trying to solve, and I wish you luck. And certainly you can be sure that from my perspective, I'll be the first one knocking on the door when those doors open again. So great to have you on as my guest. Appreciate your time. Good to speak with you.
Thanks, Lee. Appreciate the invite. Really enjoyed it. Good luck.
Cheers, Mark. Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening to today's Extrology podcast. I really appreciate your audience and ears. If you've enjoyed it, then why not hop onto iTunes and give us a review? I'd really appreciate anything that you might have to say. Any feedback always gratefully received, and look forward to hosting you next time. See you soon. Just a reminder, today's podcast is brought to you by Progresso Talent Partners. Visit www.progressotalent.com today for more information.